In the previous session, we were able to fetch the recipes and render them for the user to view. And just a quick recap of that is so now right now when someone goes ahead and searches for meal for a recipe, when they click on search, they get these cards that come up with the recipes that are there. The next step from here is going to be now allowing a user to plan a meal. So the moment they click on plan a meal, the meal should be rendered down here on a page that we're going to call my recipes. And when someone now clicks on a plan meal, all their meals will come down there. They can also be able to select a date for planning their meals. And for date, we're going to be using date picker for that. To just to get started, the first thing we need to do is, of course, I'm going to create a H. Let's make it a H2, and it's going to say my recipes. We'll style it just a bit. Increase the size of the text. We also increase the font and give it a margin bottom so that there can be a clear distinction between this and the container we're going to create. And this div is the one that is going to where we're going to have the meals that our users planned, and I'll give it an ID of planned meals. We will also style this. We'll also style this div, but the styles for this div are not any different from the styles that we did for this other div. So I'll just copy this. We don't need a margin bottom for this unless we get to a point where we add a footer. Okay, I need a class, and I'll paste all that styling in there. So we've gotten the same stylings for this other div. Now, after getting this, the other thing that we need to do is we also for the date. So for date, we're going to use flat picker for someone to pick a date for someone to be able to pick a date from a calendar. And for flat picker, the first thing we need is to link flat picker here, so via CDN, and it also there's also a script that we also need to link it down here. So down here we also link another one. So with this we'll be able to use flash picker for getting the dates. So while a user is planning to get planning a meal, they can pick the date that they want to do that. So after adding flat picker to these are the two links that you need for you to be able to use flat picker effectively. Let's go ahead and try to integrate flat picker. So we'll integrate most of these things at the same time. We need to integrate flat picker. We also need to make sure that we display the planned meals down here as well. And we also go ahead and we'll also implement local storage, but we can do that either later or some other time. The first thing we need to do is, of course, get the planned meals. We're setting a variable called planned meals. So do document dot get element by ID, and we're getting the planned meals. Let me just confirm that that's what we call it, planned meals exactly. Yeah. So after getting the planned meals, we need to we need to store all these meals. We need to store all these meals somewhere. So we're supposed to render the meals. Actually, we're supposed to render them down there, and we can start with that before we start implementing other things. So we have render recipes. I think we can render our planned meals down here. So we create a function, we'll call it render planned meals. And so for planned meals, we'll at first, before if there are no planned meals, so we'll just do planned meals dot inner html. So we'll not have any meals any meals rendered at first. Again, this is going to be even way before we start implementing local storage. Then we also now we'll try to get the data. We'll try to get data for our planned meals. So remember, once we get the planned meals, we need to store this all these planned meals somewhere. For the storing of the planned meals, let's actually do that first. So we'll get can do it here at the top. So we'll get that data for the planned meal. So we'll call it planned meals data. And there are two reasons where we're adding this. So first, it could be that there are meals that a user has probably as planned and as stored somewhere. So it could be like in local storage, or also a user could have the meals and they they've already basically added them down there. So what we need to do is we need to get that. We'll actually just implement even local storage at the same time. So we'll just json.pass, so passing this data. So we'll first try to get the information from local storage. Again, we haven't implemented local storage yet, but we can do that for now. So local storage dot get item. Get item is the method that we use to get from local storage. Then we'll call it planned meals on local storage. Okay, so these are the two options. So you could be getting our meals from local storage, or there's just an empty array of the planned meals that we're getting. Now, since we haven't implemented local storage, it's going to automatically pick the empty array that we have on the side. But once we implement local storage, we should be able to work to get all the meals. But for now, let's iterate through that array. In this case, an empty array, but it's going to be filled. It's going to be filled with data later on. So we get our planned meals. We'll use that for each method here as well, again for consistency. Then for each meal that is there, we're going to create a meal card. So again, this card is similar to the other cards, the other card that we used for rendering the data. We'll do document dot create element. We'll create another div here. So this div is going to go to the other div that we created for planned meals. We'll also get style it later. So we'll just say dot class list dot add, just to make sure you don't repeat the same error from earlier. So it looks okay. We'll give it background of white. Actually, we're going to just give it the same styling that we gave it for the other one. So allow me to copy all this. And we'll replace it here. Again, the cards are all going to be the same, so there's nothing new that we are adding for the cards. The other thing that we're also getting is here. I'll also get all this. Actually, this is some sort of a repetition. We'll just change a few things. We'll do that here. Now, instead of calling it recipe card, we're going to call it meal card. And the other thing here as well is for getting our recipes. So here's, we'll just call it meals, because for each meal, instead of saying recipe dot you or all this, we'll just say meal. So meal dot title, meal dot id. Okay, we don't need a button down here. So in place of the button, what we're going to need also down here, instead of recipe list, should be planned meals. So we're adding it to the planned meals that we got up here. So in place of where we had the button, here is where we're going to have the dates. Yeah. So now for the date, we're going to go and going to add up all this in a paragraph. Then so we'll just say planned for. Again, this is where we're going to get going to a user is going to specify the date they've planned the mail for, and it's going to be now mail dot date. Again, note that we're going to get all this information. We're getting all this from the planned mails data. So once a user adds when a user is adding the planning the meal, they're going to be adding the date for that meal. That's why we're using mail.date here. Yeah. Then we'll also style this paragraph a bit. Class. So we'll give it a color. The text, let's make it gray 700. That should be enough for now. In case we need to change it, we can do that later on. So the render meals function is done, and we're going to be using this function now to render our meals to the other section, where we're rendering all our meals. Now, the other thing that we haven't, which is a major thing that we need to do, is remember when someone gets the recipe. Basically, let's go to the browser. So let's try to search for pizza again. When we search, again, we get all the meals here, right? So we want that when someone clicks on them or clicks on this, they should be able to get they should be able to get all their recipes down there, basically. And when you go to our code, so there's this recipe list that we created up here, and this recipe list is the one that contains all the meals that we try to render. Basically, is the one that contains all of these meals. Is that all of these meals? Yeah. So we want to implement some event listeners there, so that when someone clicks on a meal, they should be able to get that meal. We're going to do that down here. So once someone does that, that's when they will also be able to render the meals. But now we've written the function for all this already. So we'll just take the recipe list dot. We're going to add an event listener, and the event is going to be click. So on click, so I'm going to have the callback function here. So for each event, so if event dot target dot tag name. So this is good. Again, all this is going to target every event that happens inside the recipe list, where we have the entire array of that. So if the where a user clicks, basically what they click is a button. So if they click on a button, if they click on a button and the button has an ID, basically. Remember, we gave all our buttons IDs. Oh, okay, this should be outside. If they click on a button and each button has an ID, so say event dot target dot dataset dot ID. So this is going to match and compare the IDs that we gave to so it was up here. We gave the ID here. So each button has an ID. So if that is the case, we're going to get the ID, and we'll store this ID in a variable. So let's call it recipe ID, where each ID goes. So this event, just repeat the same thing that we did. Event dot target dot dataset dot ID. This fetches the ID for each of it. Then the other thing that we also need is we need to get the div that for basically for the recipe card. So just say recipe card, get the recipe card, And for that, we'll do event dot target, then dot close, the dot close set should be close set, uh yeah, like that. So this is going to get the div for us. Once we get the div for that recipe card, we also go ahead and get the title. So for the title, we'll do recipe title. In I will search recipe title, that is. Then for that, for the recipe title, we're getting the recipe title from the recipe card. So this recipe card, this again, this closet here, basically allows us to get the entire div, for the entire div that contains that recipe that we want. Then from this card we can go ahead and get a few things that we want. So it's like we are selecting the entire div. So we'll just say recipe card. So you do recipe card, then you use query selector dot query selector. So as you know, query selector, we use it in DOM manipulation. So we're going to pick a h2. Remember, the recipe title, we gave it a h2. Then we just say dot text content. We basically this gets us the h2. The text content is going to add all that. Then we store this in a variable called recipe title. Then we can finally get the image. So for that, we also call it recipe image. And for we're getting the recipe image from the recipe card as well. So recipe card dot query selector. Then we are selecting an image. So for image is img. Then we're getting the src, which contains the link to the image basically. So after getting all this information, the id, the title, the image, then we can go and try to display this information. But before we get into this, again, I want us to do all this at the same time. So the other thing that we need to go ahead and do is allow a user to pick a date. So to allow a user to pick a date, again, we're using Flat Picker for this one, but there are other options. Flat Picker is could be a bit more complex for someone. The other option is for just alerting a user. You can just alert a user to enter their own date manually instead of rendering it to them like this. So for that, uh, we're going to create date input. So get an input for a user to basically choose the date. Then we'll do document dot create element. Then we're creating an input. Then we'll give it a type. So you'll say date. Should be date, not data. Should be date. Sure. So date input dot type, and the type is going to be text. Then we're going to append this to the body. So we'll say document dot body dot append child. We are appending the date input, not data. So appending all this to the body tag of our HTML document. Now, after doing this, now we can wrap all this with the rest of the things that we need to do for our meals. So remember, we created an empty array up here. We created an empty array for our meals. Again, know that this part for local storage, we're going to do it later. But the reason we created this empty array is so that whenever a user, when we click on whenever a user tries to plan a meal, then we pick that meal, we add it to the planned meals data. So that whatever meal they want to create, and we're going to have it in form of an object. So we're going to have an array of objects here. That's what planned meals is going to contain, and that's why we have that array there. But so we're going to start with because we're using Flat Picker to basically plan our meals. So we're going to call Flat Picker here. So Flat Picker, that's how it's written. and it's going to take in two arguments. So the first thing is data input, where we're getting the date input, not data, date input. And then the next thing is going to take is an object. So the object is going to be on close. So on closing, basically the picker, basically we're going to go ahead and implement the other things. So there are few things there are a few things that are going to a few things that are going to get. And the first thing is the selected date. We're also going to get the date string. The date string is basically the one that contains the information for that date, and you're also going to get an instance for that. We won't need all this information, but it comes with flat picker. So, or rather, we need for this specific application. So let's just say selected dates. This will be capital D. Selected dates. There's a date string, and there's an instance as well. So these are the parameters that this is going to take. Again, we won't need all of them, but if there's a date string, because that's what we're interested in the most, there's a date string, we can date should be date. I keep on calling it data for some reason. So if there's a date string, we're going to push all the meals that we have to the planned meals data array that we created up there. Again, this is to make sure that a user inputs a date. So planned meals data dot push, and what we're going to push in form of an object. So we have the ID is going to be the recipe ID. Then we're going to need the title of this. So title, call it recipe title. We need an image, of course. This is recipe image. This is how we call it. So recipe image, and then we need a date. So for date is it's the date string that we're getting from flat picker. So after getting all this information, after getting all this information from here, what we're going to do is we're going to save we're going to save the planned meals, but we'll do that when we have basically when we have implemented local storage, which we're going to do in a few. But the main thing here is rendering the planned meals. So we create the render planned meals function here. And then the other thing as well here is going to be, yeah, that's basically it. So let's go ahead and okay, not really. So what this is going to do, this is going to render the meals, right? Then after rendering the meals, we also need to basically just remove the date input, because we only need the date input when a user wants to add a meal. So if they don't, once we render, we can just remove it. So just for that, we'll say document dot body, because we added to the body. Then we'll use the remove child method, and we'll specify we want to remove the date input. That is what this line here is going to do. Then the last thing, I need to add the semicolons here. The last thing that I'm going to make sure as well is make sure that we basically open the date picker. So for that, we'll just say date input dot click. So what this is going to do is going to open the date picker every time we want it to open. Then so we render our planned meals when all this happens. So on selecting on close, that is, so we render the planned meals, but at the end of the day we still need to render our meals. So we'll also render planned meals down here. This is whenever there's just normal times when there's no, we don't need to, or rather when you don't need to, when you don't need the flat picker. Basically, after picking the meals, there's always going to be meals that need to be rendered. That is what this is going to do. We'll quickly just implement some local storage. So the only thing that we're remaining here with the local storage I'll add it here. So after rendering our planned meals, uh, so after entering our planned meals, we want to just save the meals to local storage. So I call it save. Again, we only want to save the planned meals. That's what's important to the user. So for that, we'll just call local storage dot set item. And then we're going to create the key for that is going to be planned meals, and the information going to json.stringify, json.stringify, then we'll pass in the plant meals. So the plant meals data, that is. So what we're passing in is the plant meals data. That is the data that we add a user that is added to the data that is added to this empty array every time, and we do that from here. Where is it? Here, planned meals data dot push. Then so after pushing, we can save them to local storage. So just say save planned meals data. Okay, I believe with this we should be on a good track. We haven't gone to the browser for a minute, so we already have some meals added here, and I believe these are the meals that we are trying to add earlier randomly. So let's try to add a meal like, let's say, beef. If you search beef, you get all this here, and let's try to add. So plan a meal. The moment you click on plan a meal, uh, so the date comes up here. This is something that we need to change, but let's pick a date. So let's say 30th. The moment you do that, the meal adds itself. Why is it? I think it's this one here that we picked. So if you refresh again, the meal is already selected and is here. Yeah, so that's how you implement all this. We have the recipe image. Yes, we have all this information. So that is basically it for creating, rendering, saving everything to local storage. And yeah, so we'll do some final touches in the next session. But so far we've seen how you can fetch the data, render, save our recipes to local storage, and also plan our meals and add them to the planned meals section. This has been long, but thank you for watching this far. Cheers.